things that we're all learning is all the things that John Gibbons does that we don't have on our list, and I can already tell that one of them is called add fluid to the flaming chalice. Check. Got it. Our opening words this morning are written by Leanne Batasamosake Simpson. I want to say that carefully. And in these opening words, which come from a piece called As We Have Always Done, she references someone named Doug. That person is Doug Williams, and he is an Anishinaabe elder. These are Leanne's words. Over a decade ago, I was listening to Doug speak to a group of Canadians in a coffee shop in downtown Peterborough, a city in central Ontario, between Toronto and Ottawa. Peterborough is known to be a conservative hockey town, really a small city, on the edge of cottage country. Doug wanted his audience to know where they were, and he began by telling them what the land used to look like. The non-native audience was nearly silent, transfixed by each sentence he spoke. So was I, because as he was speaking, I was recognizing that the land I know as my home has been devastated by settlement, industrial development, the construction of highways and roads, the Trent Severn Waterway, and 4 centuries of dispossession. I understood that the landscape I knew as home would be almost unrecognizable to my ancestors, and I hadn't known previously that I could barely even imagine the worlds that had already been lost. In the weeks after that talk, I spoke with Doug about what he had shared. As we drove around our territory in the months that followed, he pointed out where the Wendat Huron villages used to be, where hunting grounds were located, the former locations of black oak savannas and tallgrass prairies. I began to start my own talks with a narrative of what our land used to look like, as a quick glimpse, albeit a generalized one, of what was lost, not as a mourning of loss, but as a way of living in a Nishanabrig present that collapses both the past and the future, and as a way of positioning myself in relation to my ancestors and my relations. Friends, I invite you to rise in body or spirit now for our opening hymn, I've Got Peace Like a River. It is number 100 in the Gray Book.
Stay risen for our congregational affirmation written in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor y ayudarnos los unos a los otros. You may be seated. Good morning. Good morning. It is a beautiful day today, and it's a beautiful day to run a road race, I discovered, as I was trying to leave my neighborhood, where there was a road race that seemed to be designed precisely to trap me in my neighborhood. And I had to take a very creative route to work this morning. And it was kind of funny because this morning I was speaking with my new housemate. I have a new person living in my house, and she is also a UU minister. So that brings our UU minister count in our house up to 3, rather high ratio. And she had a service she was going to preach at this morning as a guest preacher, and her service was at 11. And she said she was going to get there at 10, and I was saying, well, my service is at 10, and she said, oh, wouldn't it be funny to just stroll in at 10 for a 10 o'clock service? And we both laughed, that's so silly. And then I got here at about 9:56 because of the road race. So be careful what you laugh about. So you're welcome here this morning. If you just rolled in, frazzled and stressed out because life is not going your way and something's blocking you at every turn, you are welcome here. And if your path in today was smooth and you were enjoying the beauty of the day, you are welcome here with that joy and ease. This is a Unitarian Universalist congregation, and so we invite people to bring their full selves, your feelings and your doubts, your beliefs and your questions, and all of your identities. And we invite you to come in your fullness, ready to be transformed into a better version of your true self. Today, I want to draw your attention to a couple announcements. One thing is that if you are new, then you should stop by the welcome table or fill out a blue connection card, because we would love to get to know you better and fold you into this community. There will be a one-room schoolhouse style religious education experience today for kids of all ages who will be learning more about Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, as it is practiced in Mexico and other parts of Central America. And next Sunday, we have a special service where we will hear from some guests, including a youth speaker about the United Nations, the UU United Nations Office, or the UUUNO, which is kind of hard to say. But it is an important endeavor, ever more important in these times, that we get together from people all around the world to work on global issues. And so that will be a real treat for us to hear from those folks. Also, you are invited today, later this afternoon at 2 p.m., we will be honoring and celebrating the life of Mary Casoy, one of our dear parishioners, and all are welcome to that. And I also want to make sure that Tim Bennett can make his announcement. Tim.
Good morning. On November 1st and 2nd, the senior youth group is going to Boston in order to participate in City Reach, which is a program designed to teach youth firsthand about homelessness. To this end, we are holding a clothing drive, and we are collecting donations of rugged unisex clothing such that you might take camping in the narthex. They're also in need of newly bought undergarments for both men and women. So thank you in advance for any donations you feel able to give. Yes, Father. Oh, it's that room at the opening of the church. There's a bin in there. Great. Thank you, guys.
We don't always heckle our announcers. Yes, there's that overlap. But it is really fantastic that our youth are doing this City Reach program. It's a great program, so please do bring your rugged unisex clothing and newly purchased undergarments and put them in the bin in the narthex, which is back there. And with that, we will move on to a tale for our time for all ages.
Thanks, Annie. And it's a good thing that we have friends, and I have Gray Hannigan as my lovely assistant. And I want to invite any children or youth or anybody who feels like they want to be a child or a youth today to come closer, because we're going to tell a story that has some gorgeous illustrations in it. And I think that you may want to get up close to see these. So come on up, don't be shy. This is, thank you, y'all. Moira's already got an up-close seat, so that's really good. Everybody else can come on up. So this is, because we are talking about Indigenous people today, this is a Lakota Sioux story that was written by S.D. Nelson, who is a member of that community of people. And it is also illustrated by S.D. Nelson, and it is called The Star People, a Lakota Story. And thank you again to Gray for showing everybody these pictures. Young Wolf and I had wandered far across the prairie. Being his older sister, I wanted to show him the wonders of our world. "Look up, brother. Do you see how Father Sun travels high in the sky during the day? And see, beneath our feet, Mother Earth is alive with growing things." My little brother looked for a long moment and then said, "Sister girl, I cannot see our village anymore." "Let's stay for just a while longer, young wolf," I said. "Then we will go back." We sat in the dry, sweet-smelling grass, watching the clouds drift overhead. Young Wolf pointed and said, "Sister girl, that cloud looks like a buffalo's head." We both laughed with amazement. "There's an eagle," I cried. "And horses," said Young Wolf. "The cloud spirits are playing above us," I told my brother. "The clouds are alive, and we call them the Cloud People." As I looked, I realized the clouds had turned dark in the distance. Lightning struck the dry earth. "The day is coming to an end," I told Young Wolf. "Mother and Father will be expecting us." Now, I had no idea where we would find our village, and the dark of night was near. I tried not to cry as I comforted my brother. "Sister girl," Young Wolf said, looking up. "Sister girl, the stars are dancing." High above us, the stars were becoming shapes as the clouds had done in the afternoon. First, there was a coyote, then a bear, and then a hawk, and many other creatures, both animal and human. Chanting, the Star People encircled us. "They are the spirits of the old ones who once walked on this earth," I told my brother. Young Wolf was the first to see Elk-Tooth Woman dancing among them. "It's my grandma," he cried. "You are safe now, my little young wolf," she whispered, holding out her arms. "I am here, my sister girl." I was so happy to see our grandmother. Young Wolf was confused. Grandma, I thought I would never see you again. Smiling, she drew us close to her, tenderly rocking back and forth like the gentle wind. Beneath a heaven full of stars, we fell into a deep sleep. Young Wolf and I dreamed of green prairies and our village. In our dream, we could see our mother and father looking for us. We called to them, "We are here, we are safe," but they could not hear us. In our dream, raindrops pattered upon the ground. Wildflowers grew and crickets chirped. Moths fluttered about in the cool moonlight. Creatures crawled from the safety of their burrows: badger, lizard, turtle, rabbit. In our dream, grandmother and young wolf lifted their feet to the beat of the drum. I joined in their dance, and together we all gave thanks. In the morning, when we awoke, I felt an emptiness in my heart. I missed our parents. Looking up at the sky and down at the trees ahead, grandmother said she would take us home. We traveled a long time across the land. In places there were flowers and green grass, and finally we came to a hilltop. Looking down, young Wolf howled, "There's our village!" I turned to grandmother. "Our father and our mother will be so happy to see you again." She shook her head. "I can go no further. I must return to my home in the sky." Young Wolf clutched Elk-Tooth Woman and would not let her go. Tears streamed down his round cheeks. I pleaded with her to stay. Drawing away from us, grandmother smiled and said, "Don't worry, my sister girl, my young wolf. I will always be with you. The star people are always with you. Look up, and you will see me among the stars." So young Wolf and I returned home safely. Our parents wept with joy to see their children, and they were very angry with us for wandering so far from home. But ever after, when my little brother and I walked beneath the star-filled heavens, we felt comfort, for we knew our grandmother and all of the star people were watching over us. And that is the end of my story. So I would like to invite children and youth to come now and join my friend Rosa Elena Rivera and me for a program where we will talk about our ancestors and the celebration of the Day of the Dead. And to take us out, Steve will help us sing. If you want to sing out, sing out.
Let's take a moment to breathe together. And we take a moment for gratitude. Gratitude for the earth which sustains us, and gratitude for the community we are here with that also sustains us. Gratitude for the everyday miracles of food and laughter, family and friends. Gratitude for the way learning unfolds and for our relationships. One more breath together again for gratitude. We also acknowledge and honor the pain that we carry, the fears we have for the well-being of our loved ones, and the many people all over the world in so many places who are being displaced from their land by violence of so many kinds. We feel that pain, we know that pain, and we commit to solidarity with those people, whether they are near or far. We carry pain and fear about our own lives and our loved ones, illnesses and challenges that we and others face, those everyday difficulties. And we bring those to this space knowing that in community we can find support and a way forward, even if the way is not clear. We take a breath to honor that collective wisdom and the finding of the way. This is a community where we work hard to sustain each other, take care of each other. And one of the many ways we do that is by collecting our resources together so that we can keep this community going. In that spirit, the offering will now be gratefully received. couple weeks ago, we had a guest preacher named C.B. Beale, and they talked to us about preemptive radical inclusion. And one of the practices that they suggested and modeled for us was learning in public. And so I thought I would start our sermon off today with a little bit of learning in public. If you read The Parishioner, which I have learned thanks to the Communication Task Force's survey that many people do, in fact, read either the online or paper version of The Parishioner. If you read The Parishioner, you may have noted that my sermon title for today was Decolonizing Our Spirits. Well, I came across an article recently on Facebook, and I noticed the title right away because I was thinking about this upcoming sermon. And the title of the article was, "Do not decolonize if you are not decolonizing, Progressive Language and Planning Beyond a Hollow Academic Rebranding by Nayantara Sharon Appleton." Kind of a long title. It was aimed at academics, hence the colon situation. You know, a lot of those titles are like, topic, lots of words strung together. But I thought it really applied to my sermon, because what I learned from reading this article was that there had been academic work about this use of the word decolonizing as a metaphor. And there's an excerpt from the academic work in the Thought to Ponder in the Order of Service from a paper called Decolonization is Not a Metaphor. And the point, as you may be realizing, is that to decolonize is to actually put land back into the hands of the people who originally lived on it, whose ancestors lived on it. So if you're not doing a concrete transfer of land and power, then you're not decolonizing, you're doing something else. Now, what you're doing may be quite admirable, but it's something else. And the person who wrote the article I found on Facebook, Sharon Appleton, gave some suggestions for words people could use that even still start with the letter D, in case you wanted to have a word that started with the letter D. She suggested diversify your syllabus and curriculum, digress from the canon, decenter knowledge and knowledge production, devalue hierarchies. And it got me thinking, well, what am I doing in this sermon? I'm not an academic, and I'm not doing all those other things that she suggested that may be happening in academia. And I came to the conclusion that what I really wanted to focus on in this sermon, the heart of it, was our relationship to land. And what I was getting at was remembering and stewarding our land. And so, thus begins the sermon formerly known as Decolonizing Our Spirits, and now known as Remembering and Stewarding Our Land. We heard about the importance of remembering in the opening reading. The Indigenous woman from Canada who had a powerful personal experience of hearing about what the land she lived on used to be like when her ancestors had been the ones living there and stewarding it. And I think it is a really important spiritual practice to take the time to learn and remember what the land has been like in the past. As she pointed out, it's almost impossible to imagine. And as humans, of course, we know what we know. And when I think about the world, I think about roads and cars and buildings and parks with trees, but those are set aside. I don't think about the land all being like that. So I did a little bit of research about our land here. Actually, I had done the research already because I was required to do it for a program I did last year called the Ann Braden Program, which was an anti-racism training for white social justice organizers. That's a lot of words also. And for that program, we were asked to do some research into the Native people who lived on the land where we lived. And I chose instead to do this land instead of where I live in Boston because I was really interested in that. And I already knew a little bit because last year I had tried to acknowledge the Native inhabitants of this land, but I did it wrong. Another learning in public. I did it wrong. I said the wrong tribe. And I'm so lucky because we have an historian in our congregation who reached out to me and said, actually, we're not totally sure what tribes lived here, but we know it wasn't that one, and it might have been this one. And so when it was time for me to learn for my program about what this land used to be like, I knew whose writing to turn to, and it was, of course, Sharon McDonald. So this is a piece from Sharon McDonald's research about Bedford's history. And it's a much, much longer passage than I would usually read in a sermon. But I'm doing it because I want to actually do the practice of remembering rather than just talking about it. So that thing that the opening reading talked about, we're going to do that right now. This is all from Sharon McDonald. The first people were pioneers and explorers. They did not found villages, but lived nomadically in family groups. They knew the movements of the animals, when and where the caribou migrated, where the bear went to den, the location of the moose's favorite marsh. Most of the vegetation was pine forest, no nuts, few berries. Plant food was scarce. It was vital that the people knew exactly what grew in each season. And their way of agriculture included not overpicking, so plants would continue to grow in those areas. Gradually, life here in these river valleys changed. This was a terribly long time ago. The stones had not yet been set up on their ends at Stonehenge, nor piled on top of each other to make the pyramids in Egypt. But in southern New England, it was getting warmer, so that the vast pine forest was being replaced with broadleaf trees, hickory, walnut, chestnut, oak. Now in the fall and winter, there were nuts to collect. In the spring, alewives and shad came up the rivers, and the people began to gather in large numbers to fish. A wonderful place to cast nets and spear them was the falls, near the spot where the Concord River empties into the Merrimack. There were river mussels and turtles to catch in the summer. Autumn again, and there were migrating geese and ducks in the great meadows. The herds of elk and caribou were gone, but there were still deer, and the whole year round there were turkeys and quail to hunt, and more small game, rabbits, squirrels, beavers, skunks, lynx, and fox. The human population increased. So that's what it was like, we think, to the best of our knowledge. And what I learned was that there were no, as far as we know, indigenous settlements right here in Bedford, what is now Bedford, but there was a footpath that led through where Bedford is now that was used by people in the local villages. There, we believe, were a village in where Burlington is now and one in North Billerica, where North Billerica is now. And this is what it was like right here in Bedford. People knew the land, they knew what grew where, they knew not to overpick, they knew where the animals went, they knew their land, and they were careful with it. They stewarded the land, and they did it together. Now, this was not only true of people who lived right here. In fact, in general, it's not universally true, but in general, this was true of people who were indigenous to all different parts of the world, and that includes Europe, where the majority of my ancestors are from, and I believe many of your all ancestors are also from. This was not a unique concept to the native people of North America, but was rather the way people lived. One other tidbit I learned from this program I did was about how the commons functioned in feudal Europe. And here's a quote about that. The commons were used for subsistence by many peasant farmers and were a refuge for the landless. People built homes, grazed animals, grew food, and it served as a safety net for elderly folks and single women, allowing a degree of autonomy that was lost with the enclosure of the commons. It was lost. This is what also came up in our opening reading. How much has been lost? How much has been lost? But she said in the reading not to mourn the loss, although it is appropriate, I think, to mourn losses. But that's not the point. The point is not to dwell in the sadness and the desperation at how much has been lost, at how much has been destroyed, at how many people have died. The point of remembering is rather to shift our behavior now. It's sort of like going to therapy. You go into the past, but the reason you're going into the past isn't just to stay in the past, it's to shift things in the present. And that is the spiritual practice of remembering the land. Remembering the land that we're living on, and remembering how our ancestors related to land, if you go back far enough. We remember this so that we can orient ourselves differently in the way we relate to land today, which is obviously very, very different. And the ways that that has shifted has changed everything, has caused many, many problems, and one that I think is on many people's minds right now is, of course, climate change. When I was at the climate strike that happened all over the world, it was very exciting, but the one I went to was the one in Boston. There was a woman who spoke, and I regrettably did not catch her name, and I couldn't find it on the internet, but I did record with my phone part of her speech because I found it very compelling. And here's one of the things she said. This was an indigenous leader. She said, "Profound climate change happened in this hemisphere following the invasion of Columbus and the Europeans who would follow. These changes were due to the decimation and genocide of tens of millions of indigenous humans within a short period of time. Systems and beliefs were brought over from Europe that saw the land and all life on it as something to be used and exploited. The land and all life on it as something to be used and exploited." This is not a new concept to me. I actually remember when I was a kid watching the Disney movie Pocahontas, and there's a song where she sings in the song, "You think you own whatever land you land on. The earth is just a dead thing you can claim." Right? That was a song I knew as a kid from a Disney movie. It's not a new concept, but it still hit me in a different way. Being at that march with so many young people, so many people saying, we have to change this, we have to fix this, we must do something. And that reminder, yes. And this is happening because we radically shifted the way that our ancestors and the people who used to live on this land related to the land. Another speaker I heard when I was at this Ann Braden program is a man named Gopal Dayaneni, and he does climate change organizing and activism. And he talked about this same thing about kind of reframing the issue. And he said something that kind of blew my mind. I think he was trying to provoke us a bit. He said, climate change is not an issue. It's not the issue to focus on. It's not the issue to solve. People are all focused on carbon. How much carbon is going out and how much can we sequester and what can we do about the carbon? And he said that's not what really is the thing to focus on, because climate change is a symptom, not a problem. It's a symptom. And it's a symptom, he said, of capitalism and colonialism. Another way he framed it was the subordination of land and labor to capital. So once again, the subordination of land, that thing about treating the land like a thing to be used. And he said, what if we thought instead of about carbon, what if we thought about health? Now that's something that affects everyone, and everyone can relate to: healthy children, healthy communities, healthy families, health. And he pointed out that while the amount of carbon in our atmosphere does have a strong impact on everyone's health, it's also not the only factor. And maybe if we thought more about health, we would think more about holistic solutions. And I thought that was really interesting, which isn't to say that people should not think about carbon. Obviously, we should. And I'm glad that many of you do. And it's also not to say we shouldn't talk about climate change as an issue, because of course we should and we must. We must. But the reframe, I think, helps us not just in terms of how we might think of political strategies, but spiritually. Because it helps us to get towards that stewardship, that stewarding of the land. If we think about the problem as being the subordination of land to capital, the exploitation of land, the way we treat land like a thing to be owned and used and extracted from, then it is not just that we need to change our policies around how much companies are allowed to pollute and what kind of energy we use, although we do need to do that. It's also a spiritual shift that each and every one of us can make. A spiritual shift from the idea that we own land to the idea that we steward land. Now, that can be a rather radical idea. I imagine many of you might own land. You might own homes, and those homes might be on land. You might even own land in multiple places. Some people have vacation homes and cottages and things of this nature on land in other places. So you might own multiple pieces of land. So what does it look like then to shift from land ownership to land stewardship when we live in an economy and system that operates completely on the ownership model? I don't really know. But I really like thinking about it. And I really like trying to feel in my body and in my soul what that shift feels like. Now, there are models of how people do this, right? We're not without models. There's a beautiful model that I learned about in the San Francisco Bay Area, the Segurite Land Trust, where they are decolonizing, non-metaphorically. They created a land trust, indigenous leaders created a land trust, and they are returning lands to indigenous stewardship. This trust can purchase lands because we're still in this economic model of owning land. They can purchase it so that they own it, and then they can steward it communally the way their ancestors did on that land. And many people do this type of thing. There's a Dudley Neighbors Land Trust in Boston, somewhat near where I live, that helped people to have affordable housing. There's conservation lands that I believe people steward right here in Bedford. Bedford Conservation Lands have stewards. And so there are models. It's not unheard of. But it does take a real shift within us. And that's something that I want to invite us into today, is to practice the remembering and practice that shift to stewardship. When you go somewhere, take a moment to think and wonder what the land looked like. If you have a minute, look it up online. See if there's some wonderful historian like Sharon McDonald who had written about it. If you own land here, maybe do a little more research about what it used to be like. If you own land somewhere else, find out about that. Find ways to maybe look into the way your ancestors related to land, depending on what continents and countries and places your ancestors are from. They must have related to land differently than we do now at some point. Find out about that. Do the remembering. And from that place of knowing that this system is not inevitable, does not have to be normal, is not what we used to do, none of us, then we can shift perhaps into stewarding. Maybe we can participate in more land trusts, or maybe we can just do something more interesting with the land we own, something more for the common good. We have a Bedford Common. What could we do with that? Could we grow food or create little shelters or places for people to hang out? I don't know. I have no idea. But I think it's something very exciting to consider. And I like the excitement and creativity because in the face of the ways that our relationship to land has destroyed so much, it has destroyed so many people, so many resources, it has brought about so much violence and harm and will continue to do so, we know. In the face of all that, it is a wonderful thing to imagine and get excited and creative about living into stewardship, remembering. So for our spiritual wholeness, for our children and our children's children and all those who come, we must remember. We must not forget. We must learn to relate differently to the land, to never see it as a thing, a commodity, but to see it as a part of a living ecosystem that we can love and feel love from in return, that we can care for like we would care for a child or a pet, that we can care for collectively, where we can make decisions together, and we can learn to be good stewards instead of owners. I invite you to join me in singing "We Are Building a New Way" as we imagine new ways based on old ways. This is in your teal hymnal, and it is number 1017. May we honor this land and our ancestors by remembering. May we honor future generations by being good stewards.